welcoming you to a life of awareness. The Presence Project is excited for you to join us for today's podcast with your host, Paul Kerzner.
Hello and welcome to episode 61 of Are You Being Present? My name is Paul Kerzner. I want to welcome you to the present moment. I want to welcome you to the here and now, and I want to thank you wholeheartedly, sincerely, and deeply for joining me in this amazing present moment. The title and topic of today's podcast is Honoring Emotions in the Present Moment. And being that I specialize in the treatment of emotions, anxiety, stress, and depression to be specific, but we talk about all different kinds of emotions, good, bad, or indifferent, and that's actually a perception. Regardless, I really did feel like this was the right moment to address emotions and how we can work with them in the present moment. Emotions and the way that they make us feel and think are an unavoidable part of being a human being. And while it could be true that some people have a tendency towards being more emotional, everyone experiences emotions without question. I know that Western medicine has some options for not dealing with certain emotions, but being a human being on earth means that you should want to experience the variety of emotions that are being presented to you, because if anything, they are trying to teach you something. There's a reason why you feel the way you do, and being present allows you to see that with clarity. One of the things that I've learned personally, and I've seen time and time again in clinic, is that making decisions while experiencing emotions or being emotional is certainly not a good idea. And what I mean by that is that the emotional filter it definitely prevents us from really seeing people, places, and things for how they are. We become clouded to an extent. And it's not that we don't want to honor the emotions themselves, but we have to be very careful not to allow the emotions to be the arbiter, the decider of the direction that we want to be headed in. And it's extremely difficult when you're overcome with grief, sadness, frustration, anger, to have any clarity. It's almost impossible. So the decisions that you're making with that emotional filter will have ramifications. There will be consequences, and most of the time it's rather undesirable. The kicker is that the emotions that a lot of people are experiencing in that moment aren't necessarily about that moment. And that's why I wanted to talk about honoring emotions in the present moment, because you really want to have a really good understanding of why you feel the way you do, and if the feelings that you're feeling in that moment have to do with the moment itself. So one of the things I talk about in clinic, and it's certainly something that I personally pontificate on, is, am I feeling the feelings in regards to what's unfolding in front of me? The ego loves to influence us, that voice in our head. It likes to make us feel things that have very little to do with what's unfolding in front of us. It's usually about the past or the future, very rarely about the present moment. And so we have to do our work. We have to use our tools to calm ourselves, to still ourselves, to ground ourselves into that moment so that we can see with clarity, what's going on, why we feel the way we do. And that takes a level of discourse. You have to be able to talk to yourself. We talked about parenting yourself. These are the tools that it takes to really settle the emotions. Now, you, me, everyone, we are entitled to have our feelings, to feel our feelings, especially when our feelings and emotions are about the present moment. But we're not entitled, and we certainly don't want to have feelings about the past or the future and allow it to pollute our present moments. That's a big problem, and it's certainly a behavior that a lot of us fall into. It's a trap that a lot of us fall into, and it creates a lot of collateral damage because we're acting through an emotional body that is not relevant to what's happening in the here and now. There's going to be times where you're going to get triggered and you might act out, and instead of being hard on yourself, Be understanding, be empathetic, understand why you did what you did, and then learn from it. Don't repeat it. Sometimes we do have to repeat experiences to get it right. And I think that's okay. Personally speaking, I prefer to get my lessons done the first time around, if not the second. But I do realize that there's value in repetition, and hopefully it's not fueled by self-inflicted suffering. But if I can have the right perceptions and clarity, I can see that the lessons and opportunities that are being presented to me are positive. And if not positive, then I can at least look at it through a neutral lens. But if I'm allowing emotions to overtake me, if I'm feeling feelings that have nothing to do with the present moment, then I can't see the lessons, I can't see the opportunities, and the decisions that I make in those moments, they're going to have consequences. They're not going to always be in my best interest, and things are going to unfold in an undesirable way, and that's not what we want at all. But again, sometimes things unravel, and I don't really look at that in a negative light. I understand that emotions are extremely powerful, and they can make us do things and think things and say things that can be quite damaging. It really does take a lot of effort to get to a point where you can see your emotions in the present moment and then work with them. You have to have your tools. And so I'm not here trying to figure out your past or my past or why this has happened based on the past. I'm really focused on the present moment so that I can watch myself, I can watch my mind, I can watch my ego and see why things are unfolding the way they are, because they're unfolding for me. That's always the perception. It's not happening to me, it's happening for me. And just that alone helps to soften whatever emotions I'm experiencing. Now, when we talk about emotions, it's not just negative emotions, because if you're filled with joy could be very distracting as well. And yes, we want you to definitely experience that emotion. We want you to be happy. But happiness could also lead you to make decisions in a present moment that might not necessarily be in your best interest. And you could be overly attached to the happiness, so much so that you're creating more suffering for yourself, because happiness won't last. Nothing lasts. And, we've talked about that in previous podcasts about the impermanence of this reality. Well, emotions have an impermanence as well. But we sometimes get stuck in our head, and we think that however we're feeling is never going to go away. It's never going to get any better. And that's just not the truth, but that is certainly something that your ego wants you to believe. It wants you to think and that you're stuck. This is the way it has to be. Then you definitely get looped into a rather negative manifestation cycle, which is undesirable by itself. I talk about honoring your emotions, and that is really important, because you don't want to become combative with your emotional body. You don't want to get frustrated why you're feeling this way. No, you want to be accepting of the way you're feeling in that moment, but you also want to take a step back and look at it and analyze it a little bit to see why you feel the way you do. So once you understand why you feel the way you do, you can gain some clarity and insight, and then you can make some decisions. But the decision making should not be on the front end. The decision making should be on the back end after you use all your tools, and you make sure that you're being really present in that moment for yourself and for everyone else around you. Because feelings are unavoidable, and that's a truth. Why not honor your emotions without letting them overtake you? Why not honor your emotions without letting them cloud your judgment? You don't have to make decisions right away. There are always a few instances, yes, where you will be presented with the option to make a decision or requested to make a decision promptly, but most of the time that's not the case. It just feels like that. The emotions are so overpowering that you feel like you have no choice but to make a decision, but to say something. But that's not the case. But when you allow those emotions to push you to that extent and you feel like you have no choice, Yeah, that's exactly when collateral damage takes place. That's exactly when we say things, do things, we be things that we don't want. And it's not a positive experience at all, but it's an experience nonetheless. And it provides you with an opportunity to grow and to shift. And at the end of the day, those are your opportunities that you want to take, because those are providing you with a reflection of how you're behaving, of what's going on in your life, so that you could be an active participant instead of being a victim of your emotions. So honoring your emotions allows you to be the participant, to see them for what they are, to remember that they are not permanent, to remember that everything's okay. And that is the mantra anyway, is that you're okay and that I'm okay. And that by telling ourselves that, we allow our emotions to enter into a flow state. Because our emotions, like everything else, has a beginning, middle, and end. And the more accepting you are of that emotion, the easier it will flow. But when you get into a state of resistance for that emotional state, no, you create more suffering for yourself. And yes, I understand that might seem like a tough concept to want to accept an emotion that doesn't necessarily feel good, but that emotion is there to help teach you something, or at least provide you with an opportunity to work with it instead of trying to work against it. There's no reason to be combative with yourself, because you're never going to win. That's a lose-lose battle. It's better to be accepting, to say, okay, this is happening. What do I want to do about this now? Okay, this is how I feel. Are my feelings about this present moment? What do I want to do about this? Because it's the present moment that affords you the opportunity for action. That's it. That's the only moment that you have. Forget about the future. Let the past go. Those are only illusions anyway. And those are clouding your judgment and creating a more difficult emotional state for you. And I've provided you with a variety of different tools to use to get you to be more grounded, but to enter into a state of presence and to be able to stay there. But to also be okay with slipping out of the present moment and then doing your work to get back there. It's really beautiful, and yes, at times it's extremely difficult, but that's okay because everything's relative to everything else. So sometimes it's going to be harder than other times. Sometimes it's going to be easier than other times. Sometimes your emotions are going to fluctuate all throughout the day. And sometimes you're going to have one emotion that's going to last longer than others. But again, if you're being present, you're seeing it with clarity, you're being accepting of it, and you're having a discourse with yourself. You're talking to yourself. You're talking with yourself and saying, okay, why do I feel like this? What is this about? Where is this coming from? Instead of being like, why is this happening to me? Why do I feel like this? I don't like this. I don't want this. It's just not going to work. And again, that's going to create more pressure and more frustration and more anger. That's what resistance does. And yes, I've definitely addressed resistance many times, but it's always worth it for me to bring it back up because resistance prevents presence, always. And acceptance is the medicine that you need to deal with resistance. So getting back to emotions, they are what they are. And they're there for you. If you could look at your emotions as your teacher and really see it for what it is, then it gets so much easier. I'm not saying it's easy to feel emotional. It's not. But it's a part of being a human being. And that's not something that you want to resist or try to control because it's uncontrollable. It's going to happen, regardless of how hard you try to stuff it down, to pretend, whatever it is. No, honor the emotions in your present moment for what they are. I don't think I need to go any deeper into this topic. I feel like my goal here is to really simplify something that can easily be complicated. Your ego loves to complicate things, loves to complicate emotions, loves to make you feel a variety of emotions at the same time that have nothing to do with the present moment. But we don't have to be the victim of our ego, and we don't have to be the victim of our emotions either. We want to be the active participant, and the only way, in my humble opinion, to be the active participant is to be present, to gain that clarity, And that will lead to a much easier experience for you, for everyone. So I want to thank everyone for listening to all my podcasts. I want to thank you for joining me for this specific podcast. And I want to welcome you back to the present moment.
Thank you for listening to the Are You Being Present podcast, brought to you by the Presence Projects. Remember, you have a choice. Choose to be present.